Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Dolores Project. Today, we're joined by Dr. Kate Darling, who is a research scientist at MIT and the director of the Media Lab. She is the author of The New Breed: What Our History with Animals Reveals About Our Future with Robots. Wonderful book, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But for now, hope you enjoy the episode and look further into Kate's research if you haven't already. Kate, I'm just a huge fan of your work. The New Breed was such a phenomenal book in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And if you don't promote it, I will. But it's been a great work. It's been cool to see you over the years kind of watch your progression and how you've talked about robots and tech. And I find your voice very unique among the robot conversation, and it's been really helpful for me. And but also just seeing how you interact with people too. And I think it's been really cool to see how kind you are and just relatable, even though you're kind of a big name in the field, and just just open to have conversation. And I appreciate that. And that's what it's about, right? We're trying to bring people to a table and have conversation. So I'm grateful for you and your work.
Well, thank you. And likewise, you are also a unique and important voice in this conversation. We're kind of in the same circles, and it's been really inspiring to watch you as well.
Oh, thanks, Kate. I appreciate that. I'm going to put that on my fridge. It's my case. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you about a couple different things in this conversation. One about kids. We both have young kids, and about senior adults, and about how robots and technology could interact with those two, and how should we approach those two. They're very different demographics. And I know that that's kind of your area of research, more focused on society in general, but I'm sure you have a lot of opinions to share about that. And so I'm just curious to know how your thinking evolved as you have kids. And so I don't know about your kids, but mine are really into robots. And I know that's probably related to what dad does. So I'm just curious, like, how big is the robot conversation at your house? Like, how integrated is the Darling household? Do you guys use Alexa? Do you not?
Yeah. Okay. So my kids are 5 and my daughter turned 2 yesterday, and they love robots. I don't know if it has anything to do with what I do or whether that's just something that kids are fascinated by generally, which seems to be the case a lot. We do have a lot of robots at home, and I do use a lot of devices, even devices that I have some concerns about, just because I feel like if I'm not using them, then I can't really speak to them. But the conversation, we do use Alexa. I'm not thrilled about the fact that Alexa is recording us. And I'm also not thrilled about the fact that Alexa tries to sell us things. Like, have you done do you use Alexa?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, so Alexa can make fart sounds, which my kids are
Really?
super into. Yeah. They'll
Hmm.
ask Alexa to fart. She has over 100 different fart sounds that she can do: wet farts, dry farts, long farts, like anything you can imagine. But
Wow.
after like a minute or so of asking her to do this, she'll be like, and I can also fart happy birthday to you if you buy the extreme fart package for just $1.99. Would you like to purchase it now? And so I've trained my son to say no. And I'm sure that if you go into the app, that's a feature that you can turn off, but it is the default feature that is present.
Extreme fart package.
Yeah.
That is not where I thought we were going to start our conversation, but that's interesting.
I
This,
mean, yeah, it raises a lot of issues already.
this- yeah, I thought that was wild. And like how companies like Mattel will kind of integrate that into any type of interactive toy where it's basically the gist of it is how can we sell your kids something or sell the parents something for the kids? And so it's really capitalism is just really steeped into any type of toy. And so now we built Alexas at the house with the kids and let them interact with it, but I'm not going to go buy one so that they can use it. And that's more so for my wife's sake. She doesn't like Siri and Alexa. I don't know why, but she just, I mean, I do know, but she doesn't have Siri turned on her phone. And I use it all the time. I try to be polite and use it. But that's interesting about your kids. That I mean, I think my little boy would love that. He would love that, you know. And so even with the Furby, when we hooked it up for the Alexa, I mean, it was just like fascinating. He's just completely infatuated with the Furby and wants it to make silly sounds and stuff. So I totally get that.
I work with the student who interned for Hasbro when they were doing the Furby, and her job was to, sorry to come back to this, listen to the fart sounds and try to determine which ones were too disgusting.
Okay.
So
That
lots
that
of
was our whole job.
that was her intern job at Hasbro. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds terrible. That
Very,
sounds like a
very proud
terrible.
to know her.
I want to know more. I want to know more for sure. That's like just the interview for that job. Like, okay, so 9 to 5, you're just gonna listen to fart sounds. Wonderful, wonderful experience. But yeah, like I think with kids, it's fascinating, especially to watch mine because I don't know about you, but I experiment on my kids. So apologies if you guys are watching this in the future. I do experiments on you, not in an unethical way, but I like just to see how they interact with them because I try to buy like all these robots before they go out, like Inky closed down and they made some really cool robots. And there's some other companies that I'm like, that's probably not going to last just because of the price point. And like, I'm worried that Moxie's not going to make it and some others that are really interesting robots that I think provide some really helpful stuff for kids. But I worry that because the price is so high, just like generally the company's not going to make it. But I know you've had some experience with this in your research about how parents and kids respond to robotics, especially with kids that are on the spectrum. And I think sometimes when I tell people that, they're like, how in the world can a robot help kids with autism? So how would you explain that to a parent who's saying, hey, I'm curious, I need some help. I'm definitely interested, but I'm not sure that I want to, contract this out to a robot.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I should say this is not my research. This is a lot of this research was done by Brian Scazzolati at Yale, but I'm very familiar with it, and I find it a really interesting example of something that robots might actually have to offer if we do it the right way. They've discovered that for autism therapy, robots are kind of this almost magical tool that is unlike anything that we've had previously. So, the reason I think that the robot has this magical effect is because kids and grown-ups and everyone really, and this is more my research, anyone will engage with a robot like it's a social actor. They'll treat it like it has agency. We do this subconsciously very easily. But at the same time, the kids interacting with the robot also understand that it's a robot and they understand that it doesn't come with a baggage of people. And so it's much easier for them to interact with a robot than it is with a person. But the magical thing that they've discovered isn't just that kids are willing to interact with the robot, it's that they will also interact more with people when the robot is around. And then there was this long-term study that they did, I want to say it was 2018 or 2019, where when this work got published, they put robots in kids' homes. They had the kids interact together with their parent or a grown-up for half an hour with the robot every day. And the kids' social skills went up across the board, even when they weren't with the robot. And that's pretty powerful. So it was an experiment, right? So they had to take the robots away again at the end of the study. And when they went back to test the kids I want to say months later, the skills had decreased again. So there's that. But also, just on a meta note, one of the things that I think this research in social robotics really needs to be cautious about is what behavior changes we're trying to affect and why.
Mm.
Because, I think like it's obviously super valuable to be able to teach kids better communication skills. But one question that we need to be asking is, to what extent should the goal be to try to fit neurodiversity into the mold of society versus have a society that's more accepting of more neurodiverse forms of communication? And so with all of these social robots that are used in therapy and education and health, I think it's really important to keep asking the bigger picture questions about what are we actually trying to do here and why. But that said, the fact that a robot can provide something that we haven't had previously, I think that's really the true potential of this technology. We often talk about how this technology is going to like replace us, or even the people building it are trying to sometimes replace a human skill or human intelligence, but that's really not where the potential is. The potential is actually to be something new that we haven't been able to use before.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as I'm trying to figure out different things and different interactions, that's kind of how I would want us to think about it too, is not just as a replacement, but potential for like supplement and help and not just like, hey, let's remove all human interaction. I don't think anybody wants that necessarily. I mean, I'm sure some people do, but I'm more curious, like how can I help my kids? Because our middle child, our boy, he definitely has some behavioral stuff and we're not sure, like we haven't had it tested or anything, but definitely ADHD. And my wife is a speech therapist, and so she deals with this a lot and with different kids. And so we just done a lot of research about it, but I've also just kind of watched him and interacting with, the different robots that we have. And it's you're right. Like it's not, they don't think that it's a human or anything like that. They don't think that there's any personality behind it necessarily, but there's something about the way they interact with it that's different than how they interact with our dog Margaret, or how they interact with other kids and stuff. So it's definitely different. And I want to figure out a way, like, how can I use this to help him engage with others and to find ways that I didn't have as a kid. And so we're learning a lot about ourselves through our children. But yeah, I want to definitely want to be cautious that we don't encourage some negative behaviors because of that. And um, but just trying to find a line. And I think with our kids and trying to figure out how far do we want to integrate certain tech, and will that even be an option in the future? Does it really even matter? Will they just be fully integrated in cyborgs? I don't know. But like I try to prepare them, right? And so like I try to make them at least somewhat knowledgeable about hacking. I don't know if that's wrong, Kate. I really don't, but I'm trying to, like, they know what soldering smells like, not taste. Hope they don't know what it tastes like. They know what it smells like. And like with our 5-year-old, I worry sometimes teaching him about wiring stuff and circuits. I'm like, are you going to do this when I'm not looking? Are you going to like deconstruct? Because that's how I was. I don't know if that's how you were. So I'm curious about your backstory, Kate. Like, what got you into robots and machines and led you to where you are? Like, what were the stories that really excited you growing up to kind of explore this further?
Yeah, I read a ton of science fiction growing up. My dad had all of these like 60s, 70s sci-fi novels, the like pulp novels on the bookshelf. And I was a big reader. So I like just tore my way through all of them. And the thing that I've always really appreciated about science fiction isn't necessarily like imagining the technological advancements, but rather how society changes because of those. So for me, it's always been, I mean, I love robots. I think robots are fascinating. I think a lot of people are in that boat, right? But what interests me even more is what does society do with technological change? And is technology a system that shapes human behavior? And how can we guide that? I have a law background. I went to law school
Mhm.
originally. And I think I was interested in law, and then I did a PhD in law and econ. So I think I've always been interested in how systems shape human behavior. So law
Hmm.
as a system, econ as a system, and now technology as a system. And so that's kind of what led me here. It's wait, you said something before. Oh, about the soldering. Oh, yeah. I wanted to tell you that we have this really there's this really interesting piece of work just came out of our lab that actually by the same student who did had the internship with Hasbro. So she's really interested in AI education and what types of education about how robots and AI work can actually help kids be more empowered in dealing with the world that's coming towards them. And one of the things that she discovered, and this is like early research, there needs to be a lot more work done on it. But she discovered that just teaching kids how the robots work actually doesn't help them. They'll still anthropomorphize it.
Hmm.
They can still be manipulated by it. What the thing that she discovered that kind of works is if you teach them about how the robot works and about how society is using robots, so how companies are using them and the incentives that companies have and privacy concerns and data collect. If you do that type of curriculum with them, they're more likely to be a little bit more thoughtful about how they engage with the robot. But just understanding how to program a robot or how the robot is working actually doesn't make them question it enough.
No, no. And I think they're, depending on the age, like that's something that we're thinking about too with other like educators in the state is with STEAM stuff. Like how do we teach this stuff and how do we help? Because a lot of teachers don't have a background in robotics and or they don't understand small motors or stuff like that. And so like how can we make them comfortable with working with this stuff? Because it's all about just being willing to break something, I guess, is kind of how I see it. Being okay with that. Like it's okay. And so trying to find that balance for teachers but also give them something because it is extremely hard to teach a 5 to 6 to 7 year old about servos and about programming, even with Scratch and stuff. Like, and I think they're just impatient. Like they don't
Mhm.
understand. Like, Dad, just make it do this, make it sing. And I'm like, well, that's there's a lot more to it than that. But once the magic happens and it moves and it blinks and all those things, like you're saying, then they're more concerned about it. But I found with our oldest daughter, just to go along with that, like reading sci-fi stories with her that engage that dynamic of it. So one, we're reading a prequel to Astro Boy right now. And it does a really good job of explaining kind of the philosophy of mind behind it and the questions behind like how certain people over the years have said it's just a robot, it's something more, it's a tool. But no, like what about emotion and response? And so you just kind of see like she's really interested in some of these questions. I'm like, this is stuff that I wasn't really thinking about until like PhD and after I've worked with the robots and stuff like that. I'm like, but they're interested. And I think she's also interested in how the world works. And so it's just that age group. I'm like, so that's a great point, Kate, that I guess I haven't thought enough about how to integrate like there is banal manipulation just kind of involved generally, but also kind of behind our philosophy of parenting as well. We don't want certain toys and technologies to manipulate them too much. But at the same time, and I think you made this point in your book or one of your writings, a certain level of manipulation is fine, right? That's imagination. So we don't want to squash imagination in our children. Maybe some people do, but we want to encourage that. And I want that to flourish, but I also want her and my kids, just kids in general, to also have like a general suspicion of tech, I guess, not pessimistic, but just a general suspicion.
I think what I want my kids to have is not a suspicion of tech necessarily, but a suspicion of companies,
Mm,
people, like
yeah.
because ultimately, like I don't think the robots are the problem.
Yeah,
I don't.
that's what I mean. That's what I
Yeah,
mean. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Like like robots are great. I don't think it's a problem for people to treat robots like living things. And, we can get more into that. Like that's my whole jam, like talking about how
Hmm.
that's not inherently a problem. But I do think it's a problem when people who are, governed by this capitalist marketplace we have make choices to build robots that aren't necessarily for the user's benefit, but are more to manipulate them for someone else's benefit because that's their revenue model. I think that's the problem. And it's tough because I don't think people see that. We tend to point our fingers at the robots. They're either the reason for the problem or they're the solution to the problem, but I don't think they're either of that.
Mm.
And I think in order to embrace the technology, we just need to be a little bit more knowledgeable and mindful of the fact that it's human choices that are driving this.
Yeah. Hmm. So there's an episode, and there's an episode of Black Mirror, and it's called Archangel. I don't know if you remember it. I don't remember what season it was in, maybe two or three. And it was all about the surveillance of the child, like implanting some type of system so that the parent could filter what the child sees.
Wow. I haven't
So,
seen that one.
okay, no spoilers, no, but spoilers to anybody who hasn't seen it yet. But I won't tell you how it ends. But basically, the mom has this implant put into her child, and she can control like whether or not they see nudity, blood, language. So all those things are blurred out, basically. And obviously, there are some problems as she grows and becomes a teenager, and like just the things that we experience as teenagers. We don't always make the best choices in life, and I think that's okay. Like you should have that freedom to a certain extent. But I wanted your thoughts on that. Like, if is that where we're going in a way? We think about what the smartphone is right now for a lot of parents. It's justified. It's like I'm going to give my kid a smartphone basically because I want to low jack them. I want to know where they are. I want to know, like, I want to filter their content, or at least try to, and just kind of want to check on them and be involved in their world. But like you're saying, the tech companies, I think they cater to the autonomy of the child, right? So think about like Snapchat and TikTok and different things. It's not so much about how do we help support the parent, but how do we cater to the autonomy of the child? And so my concern is that we will lean more towards just taking the autonomy completely away. And I wanted your thoughts on that. I was hoping you'd seen the episode, but
Oh, I haven't. I'm like behind on Black Mirror. But I mean, I get the premise of it. And like as a parent, you know, it hits home really hard because, before I was a parent, I had a lot of opinions about how parents should be, right? And now I'm a lot more humble about it
mm,
because I very much understand the impulse you would have to want to protect your kid from seeing things and our when our kid went off to school and started interacting with other kids and bringing home information that I couldn't curate for him, I was like, "Oh my god." But, ultimately, I it's I think for me, being a good parent isn't protecting my child from seeing things or being exposed to things. It's being able to have conversations about those things. And so, I mean, similar to robots, like I don't want to protect my child from or prevent my child from interacting with Alexa, but I do want my child to understand, you know, what's happening in that interaction and, why we're not buying the extreme part package and why that's manipulative and why that's what the company wants. And, he's
yeah,
5. I'm not sure he understands that quite yet, but like a middle schooler can definitely understand that, right? Yeah. And with the phones and the tech, I mean, companies have users' interests in mind to the extent that that's profitable for them, right? And I think that there's a lot of bad business models out there, and the interests of what the companies want are never going to be fully aligned with what's socially beneficial because that's just a very different
mm,
incentive, different goal. And so I think we need to be cautious as parents, but also, eh, like you were saying, in how we use the technology because if we're just trying to censor and restrict, again, I don't know how the episode ends, but I imagine that
Yeah.
it's a little critical of that.
It's not good. It's not good. And I think too, like with parenting, we're trying to for the best of our ability. We all leave scars on our children, just pastorally. I just see that all the time. But and that's okay, like because that's just who we are as humans. Like we make mistakes. And robots too. But we're just trying to help them be prepared for the world. And so I don't think sheltering them from everything. Like I know my wife says I go too far sometimes. Like I read Kant to my oldest when she was a baby. And just giving you a framework about why she's justified in saying some of the things she says to me. I'm like, I, I try too hard to prepare her for the world because I know that the world is going to be harsh. And I have an extreme view of that because I've seen some harsh things. Well, here it is, the new breed. I said I'd talk about Kate's book a little bit, and I will. And so, not sponsored by Kate or anything like that. This is not, like she didn't send me this book for free or anything. And I've gladly paid for it and read and benefited from it. And I want to give it some love and shout out for just such a clear book, but also a very innovative and clear thesis about how we should relate to AI and to robots. So I've read so many different scholars in the field and done a lot of research on this topic. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think Kate's voice is so unique because it gives us a clear way to think about AI and robots that's not driven by apocalypse, but also very much attuned to how we might use it for good and how we might take responsibility for what we're making and how to deal with all the ambiguity between people who are making robots, big tech, how to think about this in relation to kids and family, as we've been talking about in this episode. So I just want to highly recommend this book. That it's something that the scholar can appreciate. It's something that your grandma can appreciate in some ways. So if she's tuned into the news and she's freaking out about generative AI, maybe this is a good thing to give to them and to say, hey, look, this is something we should think about. It's actually not that big a deal, really. I mean, it is, but it's not the Terminator. It's not those other things that we've tried to project onto it. And there's actually very clear ways of thinking about our relation to these very different objects, right? And the best way to think about them is not as human-like and not as becoming human, but as actually thinking about the way that we've historically thought about animals. And even that has changed, right? And so she talks a lot about how that culture has changed, and we pay a lot of money for our pets now, and we domesticate them, and it's kind of become this whole new subculture of pets. And maybe that's how we should think about robots and AI. So, highly recommend it, and I hope you'll go pick it up and dialogue with it. It's wonderful to be unprepared. That's kind of one of my biggest fears as a parent. Like, that I won't be around and something will happen and like dad never prepared me to change a tire or he never prepared me to, set up my finances or, like those type of things because I didn't have that. And so, that's a pendulum swing. So she has a good way of bouncing and saying, yeah, that's kind of unrealistic or, but even with tech, one of the things I appreciate about your just kind of worldview and philosophy of parenting too is that you don't post pictures of your children online. That's a big thing that I try to tell people about. And if you've researched it any, I think you would come to that conclusion. That kind of goes back to the autonomy thing, right? Like my 8-year old is becoming a young lady now. She doesn't look like she's different. And so I also want her to have her own choice in whether or not she wants her photo in the world, and like we've taken that away from our kids in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That was another thing where before I had kids, I thought I was going to post pictures of them because I've always enjoyed seeing like my friends' kids
Yeah.
and like celebrities' kids. And like, I like following that. And my theory was that it helps people who like aren't in my immediate environment, but who I like want to be connected to. It helps them be connected to my kids. And then I had like a locked Instagram account for them. And once my son was, I think, 3, and it like became so apparent that he had his own personality and was just like a completely individual human being, it started feeling icky to me to just post pictures without his consent. And so I stopped. And, I do think that there's something to be said for people who do share and like that connection aspect and making people feel a part of your kids' lives. I think that there's definitely value there. So like I don't judge people who do want to experience that. But just for me personally, I couldn't do it. I was kind of surprised because I personally like overshare a ton on social media, but I couldn't do it to my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. But I see it like it's just a part of my life. If you were hanging around me, I'm going to overshare, like, so like, that's just who I am. So, it's just kind of all my crazy just comes out. If you like it or not, that's fine. If you don't like it, just ignore it. But no, that's good. And I think those are questions we're going to have to deal with as we maybe even think about our grandkids and trying to help them think through, which kind of brings us to the next part of our conversation that I want your input on is senior adults. And so when we're sitting in the nursing home, if we make it that far, Kate, like if we're sitting in the nursing home one day, how would you feel if, I think I know how you'd feel and I would feel, but how would you feel if one of your primary caretakers was, you know, a robot, or like there's a lot of automation inside your room where you no longer have the nurse kind of come and help you. It's whatever this robot is or robotic arm. Do you think that's where we're headed as a society in the West? I know there's some different perspectives on that in the East, but I think in a lot of ways we reflect kind of generally where that's headed. So what do you think? Good or bad? Should we embrace that? Should we just kind of give grandma to the robot, or is there a balance between that?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it really depends. Like you said, a balance is important and it depends on what we're using the automation for. Because like we were talking about earlier, there are some things that robots can provide. We can get into the Paro baby seal robot that's used as a medical device, which I actually think is a really compelling use case. But I also just want to say that robots can't replace human care. So, as long as they're a supplement that's actually providing something useful to the patient or to the caretakers, that's great. But it's never going to be able to replace the human caretaking. And so, should we leave grandma to the robots? No, no. But if we can give her some robots that can actually help her quality of life in addition to human care, then yes, I think
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. And I do think that, the research behind Paro is quite compelling, and others, and even like Huggable. And I would like to see a lot more development in some of those areas because I do, well, not as much in the last year, but I used to spend a lot of time in these circles, right? So it's part of my job to provide care for people and to spend time with them. And so what I notice and see in these spaces are a lot of neglect, not just physical neglect that's there too, but emotional neglect. And some of these nurses, bless them, they're just exhausted and drained, and it's overwhelming. And if you spend any time in those circles, that's true. And so I think some of the beauty of not just supplementing out the emotional care, but the extension of that. So like you're dealing with church members who have moved into full blown dementia and stuff. We sit with them, and within 10 minutes, we've gone through so many different life stages, and it's just an onslaught of information to take in, and you don't know how. It's awkward to respond. And I'm worried that I'm not giving them the attention that they need, and contact, and all those different dimensions. And I think a robot's not going to get exhausted with hearing that story for the 30 millionth time. It's not, I'm not saying that that's the only contact that person should have, no, but at the same time, like I wish I could afford to buy these robots for them to have because they're quite expensive and a lot of these care centers don't have the funding to, buy them. But I think, they're interested in it and they, see the research and they would gladly welcome the help. And I just wonder if we could, help people see the need to invest in that. And I think it's hard though. I think it's hard for people to make that step.
Yeah, I mean, it also feels off to people like, oh, what, you're just gonna give people a robot instead of human care? Or the fact that so the Paro, the baby seal robot is designed to give people the sense of nurturing something. And so that sounds really creepy. Oh, you're deceiving people. You're giving people the sense of nurturing something that's not alive. But then again, they've been able to use it as an effective alternative to medication for calming patients down. And again, like, I don't think we should be taking a societal problem, which is the lack of care and the lack of compensation, proper compensation for people doing those jobs. I don't think we should be throwing robots at that problem and trying to solve that with robots. But I do think that the Paro is a very interesting supplement. It's a replacement for animal therapy that's used in contexts where it's hard to use real animals for
Hmm.
safety and hygienic concerns, cost reasons. But it really works, and I think it provides something even that people don't provide, like, in that when you're in that type of situation, your life has kind of been reduced to being taken care of by other people, right? And so
Mm,
having something that you can snuggle and pet and, like, take care of, as creepy as that sounds, is actually a really positive experience for people, even if they're not fully understanding what's going on. I think there are definitely a lot of ethical issues there, but like you, I'm really enthusiastic about the seal robot, and I wish it was more accessible to people. It's a medical device. It has to be really safe and robust. So it costs almost $7,000.
mm.
There are a lot of insurance companies that cover them now. So that's one inroad. But yeah, it's a very, very expensive device still. And there's some cheaper ones that have come out. Hasbro makes a robot cat that's only about $100. It is the creepiest thing I've ever seen. I have one at home and I hate it.
Why?
Um, it's just so poorly made. I mean,
Oh,
because they
yeah.
had to make it affordable, but, like, the motors are loud and it circles around, and then they literally, and I confirmed this with someone at Hasbro. They didn't take cat sounds, they stuck a microphone in a human's face and they were like, "Say meow," and that's, like, the sound the cat makes, is a human saying meow.
Oh, that's creepy.
But they've done all these tests with them and they've put them in homes and people love them. Like, they actually like this cat. So even something simple like that might be a help. Again, it's not gonna replace a person, but it's giving them a different experience or reminding them of, a pet that they might remember. It's a tool that we can add to the other tools that we have in these contexts that I think can be helpful.
Yeah. I have a lot of widows that have like cats and it just made me think like just buy them like, cause some of them have a lot of cats and they won't get them fixed and they just keep breeding and stuff. And so there's just like these onslaught of cats. It's like maybe here's this cat you don't have to feed. You know, it doesn't catch the mice either though. So that's kind of a trade off. So no, she just had like 100 cats just running around. The servos are just like really loud. But yeah, I think that's cool too. And I'm always interested in these little companies that they're just obviously trying to survive. And there's one a leak by Energizer Labs that's come out. It's $140. And so I'm trying to get one to experiment with, but it's really cute because it's snarky. Like and I think that's a part of the magic too. Like I want robots to have a little bit more not necessarily autonomy, but maybe to design in as a part of the human interaction piece is like no, I'm not going to do that right now, or just kind of like Cosmo. He doesn't want to be picked up and he will shake and vibrate if you pick him up or turn him upside down. Just kind of little characteristics like that make a big difference. Like, I don't want to be pet right now. I think that adds a little bit to it, is where if it's just your slave type thing, it doesn't, it kind of loses some of the magic. And so I kind of wish more companies would put that in the design as well, not to deceive necessarily, but to make it more enjoyable in interaction. Like, I don't know, there's lots of examples, but I think that's something that's missing too in the interaction that people would enjoy. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, some more personality.
yeah, definitely lots of it. I think the more, especially with kids, they love that, and I think
Oh,
that's why
yeah.
Cosmo was fun for the kids, because he played games with them and different things, and you could program it to do anything. But once you add a little bit of, the next one was Vector, that had an AI in it, and it was even more fun. But like I said, those companies usually don't last long because parents don't want to pay $300-$400 for a little robot that kids lose interest in if they're not going to learn how to code and stuff.
Yeah.
But
There
we've Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I mean, yeah, I think you're right, the price point and, like, the fragility of the devices, we're still not at that tipping point where it really makes financial sense to have robots. We will get there, but we're still in the Palm Pilot phase.
Yeah. And I think too, it's kind of, there's an assumption that these robots are going to work in, like, not suburban, but more like in a metropolis, or they're going to be on a university campus. I'm like, what about the robots like in the South, man? Like, I want to see a robot that can navigate a dirt road or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
like that's, with a Starship. Like, he's gonna need some mud grips to come down some of these roads. Like, it's not we have paved roads, but the way that things wash out, and even in Jackson, like, there's lots of potholes, and it's, the infrastructure is just different. Like, it's very different in the South as far as our local government is concerned. But I think that would also help some of it as well. And of course, you always have rednecks who are going to be afraid of T-800s and stuff. But I'm like, that's not the issue, man. But like, we could have drones, man. We could have drones delivering stuff, but they're too scared you're going to shoot it out of the sky with a shotgun. So that's that's where I live, Kate. So it's different. But I wanted to ask you as well. So this is kind of more geared towards my questions for you, and as far as like my particular concern for your research, and trying to get people in faith communities involved in this conversation. So I don't know how familiar you are with some of the dialogue, but it's it's usually pretty pessimistic as far as how religious people view robots, and how, I mean, it gets extremely pessimistic in some cases. Like, we just don't want, like, we're anti smartphones in some communities. We think smartphones are like the end all be all to what's wrong with society, and so you can see that translates into robotics and AI as well. And my mother-in-law was send me stuff every time there's something on Fox News, and I'm like, just it's okay. Like, it's gonna be okay. you know, we've been thinking about this for a while, but I think there's just a general concern that robots are going to replace humans, which I don't think is the case, or that AI is going to have some massive takeover, and the advent of Chat GP3 and Chat GPT and all these other things. I think there's just a lot of fear. And so what advice would you give to me and others who are trying to communicate the importance of this tech to those type of mentalities and concerns?
Yeah, it's a great question because I do think that some, hesitation is warranted. Definitely, these new technologies are pretty powerful, and especially the newer developments in AI with the generative AI models, like that's pretty game changing in a lot of ways that I didn't anticipate. I was just at a conference with a bunch of people who like work on that stuff, and they were surprised by like how quickly this stuff got developed too. But I think the most important point to me, um, that I deeply believe is that the technology is not the problem. It's all about human choices and the systems that we have put in place. So our political and economic systems that, for example, set short-term corporate profit incentives, or just like, the ways that people are choosing to design or use the technology. I think that is at the heart of the problem. And there's no reason to fear the robots themselves. In fact, I think that distracts from us seeing where the real issues are.
Yeah. So I guess my question, if I were in the room with more makers of these models, and I guess I just need your advice too on reaching out to some of these companies. Like I ask them sometimes, is there a way to, so like with Jibo and Moxie and others, where there's obviously educational benefits to it, right? It's just kind of clear cut, especially with Moxie, where it kind of bonds to one particular child and engages that one child, that one user. And that's kind of its niche, right? That's what it's good at. But there are others that could be used, I think, broadly to do the same thing. My question is like, is it possible to integrate some faith components into these models? Like, is it possible for them to also reflect like whatever faith that you have or whatever, if that's important to your family? And is it possible to encode that into them to where they reflect, like with ChatGPT, like it, it does a really good job. And I know just kind of based on the data sets of like pastors have asked it to write sermons and stuff. And like, it actually did a pretty decent job of saying something in the ballpark of what I might say about this particular text. So I'm like, okay, so that to me indicates that it's probably going to do a decent job of responding to the faith community the way that we might respond. But I know there's going to be a lot of issues with that as far as the faith community is concerned. But I'm curious though, like how would companies approach that, and how could they would they even approach it? Like, should we even ask them to kind of consider that, because they're not necessarily making these models just for the user. They're, like you said, there's economic parts in play. But I think that's a big demographic that is missing out as far as like who would buy this. You think about those communities, and like I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I'm curious how might we approach that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's absolutely possible. In fact, I think that the future of some of these generative AI models. So right now, like what Chat GPT does is just like it's been trained on data that's been scraped from the whole internet, right? And so it's it can speak to a lot of different things and it can create a lot of different answers, and that's great, but it's also kind of unpredictable what it's going to spit out. Well, yeah, so I agree with you that it's definitely possible to add, you know, a faith-based component, especially because I think the future for some of these generative AI models right now, what they do is they're trained on data that's just they scraped as much data as possible from the entire internet. And so Chat GPT can like, do all manner of things,
Hmm.
including writing sermons, but like does everything. And as a result, it's also more risky to use it commercially, for example, because you don't know what it's going to spit out. You can't, they put in safeguards as much as they can, but it could spit out something harmful or false information or something they're not going to be able to solve that. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to make more domain specific AI. So, for example, in the health context, like you create a data set of a bunch of like health data, and then you train an AI on that. And then, you have better control over what was in that data set to begin with. Now, similarly, you could have a data set that is all faith-based content, and you could train an AI to, you know, be really good in that domain. Now, the question is just, would companies do this? And I, companies are sometimes smart about where there's a market, but sometimes it's about the people developing the technology and whether there are enough, faith faith-based people in the organization to be like, hey, we should do this application as well. So like, how many people on the tech teams that tend to be very homogenous and like very much like same cultural background, like same demographics, like everything. How many people are on that team being like, hey, this would be a really interesting application. So I think your instinct to like get in touch with companies is exactly right, because they might just not be thinking about that. I want to say Alexa does have some applications like that though.
Hmm.
So big companies like Amazon are probably more aware of like the markets, but smaller companies that are coming with like new social robots, they're probably not thinking about that. And so getting in touch with them, because yeah, I think it's absolutely possible to do. And why not?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, why not? If I'm going to give something to a lady in the South, right? She's probably going to have some concerns that like there's a general flavor of even just nominal Christian language that we use and don't even think about here. Like everybody's grandma at some point is has had some of that language. So, and there definitely be a lot of training about our language. And like, do you know what cat head biscuits are?
No.
Okay. So there's, yeah, poor Siri. She has a hard time with the draw and stuff like that. So I'm definitely interested in it, and even like Southern training, and because we have a lot of interesting dialects around here.
Okay. Are you
And
going to explain what the biscuits are?
oh, of course. So cat head biscuits are like just homemade biscuits that grandma would make,
Mm.
and they kind of look like a cat head. So yeah, I mean, if you're ever in the South, find you a little old lady somewhere and be like, ma'am, could you? I'm from up north and Swiss origin. Can you make me a cat head biscuit? Yeah, and she will, and it will be the best biscuit you've ever had. Put some put some syrup on it. It's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Like, do you like grits? You ever had grits?
Oh yeah. Grids,
Okay,
biscuits. Oh yeah. I'm all about that Southern food.
okay. It'll cure your soul. Like if you have like deep rooted issues that need curing, the best place to start, Southern food. Now, if your stomach's not attuned to it, be careful. Like walk into it slowly because it will hurt you, right? So like it's you gotta baby step into some of the Southern food. But yeah, I'm curious, and I've reached out to some companies about it, and reached out to multiple care centers, and just trying to figure out how to have this dialogue with robotic companies, because I think there is a big market that is missed. And I'm not talking about like, I'm talking billions of dollars that somebody will integrate a faith component into this. I think it would be accepted. Like, I think it would be, now maybe not so much from the theological community, and we're really weird. I understand that, but you do have some strange people like me who are like, yeah, let's think about it and use it. But I think just every day kind of usage, and there's a lot of application that's just not touched, and I want to change that. So I'm grateful for your work, Kate. I mean, just what you're doing, and I'm curious about where do you see us going, as far as like what are you hopeful for? Not in the dystopian way, but like what are you hopeful for about our future with tech, and especially robots?
I actually think robots have a lot to offer. We've talked a little bit about how they're this new type of tool that can offer something different. And I think if we can lean into that a little bit more in the places where the technology is really being conceptualized and designed, I think that there's so much cool stuff that we could do. There's applications that we haven't even thought of yet that would actually maybe support and help human flourishing. And I think it just requires like understanding what I believe to be true, which is that the true potential of the technology is really to be a partner in what we're trying to achieve and not just like recreating something that we already have. And I think that once we can really realize that and lean into it, it's going to be cool. I think we're going to be able to do some really cool stuff.
So are you open to like having a chip implant, or are you how open are you to becoming a cyborg? Like I think we're generally cyborgs, and that we take, like I take anxiety medicine. I've taken stuff for PTSD. I think about many people in our context who have pacemakers and different things. I'm like, you're technically a cyborg in some ways, but let's take it to the next step. Like, would you be open to, like, I would love some bionic knees, like I have a bad arthritis and it's related to some injuries, but I'm like, if you offer that to me today, I would take it, like, so I'm curious. Are you open?
I'm open so long as I can trust the company that made it. But
Well, yeah,
I think
yeah.
like as a parent, I think a lot about like, when my kids are teens and they need to like rebel a little bit,
Hmm.
what are they gonna do? Because like I have a tattoo, like I did, the alcohol and stuff. It's gonna be something that I have a problem with, right? So what's that gonna be? What's the next frontier of like rebellion against me? And it's gotta be some sort of like brain implant or something. Like
Hmm.
it's gonna be something where I'm like, I
Don't you do that?
I understand why this exists, but I'm not comfortable with it because like I'm just
Yeah. Have you seen the Netflix series Cyberpunk Edge Runners?
you know,
It's it's good. I mean, it's not kid friendly at all, but like it's all about that Gibson kind of world where they call it like modding yourself, right? Where you can get different chipsets so that you can do different things, and it's all about hacking and that general culture. I don't know about UK, but I'm pretty sure my kids are going to be some type of hacker, and I'm going to be like getting them out of jail or something for, like trying to free the animals or whatever. And our kids are super, super into animals. And like my little boy, like he has a caterpillar pet. Like, I don't like, I hate to break it to you, man, but it's not going to be in that state forever. So he's like, it's my cute love bug. It's like, it's so sweet. And, yeah, like they just, but I'm like, okay with that. And at the same time, like if they're doing something for a cause that they believe is good, and like, kids, I'm not telling you I want you to go to jail, but it's like if you're doing something you believe in and it's for a good cause, I'm like, yeah, okay, like that's rebellion. I'm for that. Like,
yeah.
yeah, like fight the system if you have to, and not literally like I'm not condoning violence. I have to be careful because people in religious communities can take that the wrong way and storm the Capitol and stuff like that. But like I don't know. I think I agree with you. Like there's going to be some rebellion for sure. Like there's going to be, and maybe I'll be the old timer in the day. Like don't you take that chipset? Don't you do that? But I don't know. I think at the same time we're already so far past any type of like purity, or we are integrated into tech. But you say the word transhuman and has so much baggage to it, and you know Brave New World and all that stuff, but I don't know, like the more that I interact with robots and the more you make things, I think the more open you become to the joy of it. So I don't know if that's been true of you working at MIT, and like I know that you travel all the time and see so many different companies and stuff, but I don't know, has that really changed your perspective of robotics? Has it for better or for worse. Or I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited, and I work with a lot of great people here who I know that they care not just about, creating cool technology, but they also care about, the effects of that in society. So going into it, I would have been like, oh, these tech people are all like, single minded and they're going to destroy us all. But it's actually, there's like a lot of really great people in this area. And if we can just like harness that, I think, I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff that we could build.
Hmm. Yeah, and hopefully we can build it together. Like, hopefully we can, like you're saying, build communities where it's like, hey, these are people that don't think like me, and they're concerned about different things, but how can we come together? And so I think that's what I appreciate about kind of your heart and what you're doing is it's not just like you're taking a stance to fight against people, but I really see kind of your platform is trying to bring people together and to think positively about some of these things. And I just that's something missing. I think there's something special about that that is missing from the dialogue. And there's a lot of different tribalism and camps that people get into. And so I'm glad that you're at MIT. I'm glad you're there and doing the things that you're doing. And yeah, I also just want to highly recommend your book, The New Breed, that you wrote and talks about interaction between humans and animals and kind of all the stuff that we've kind of generally gotten into. But um, just a wonderful book that I really enjoyed. And so encourage everybody to read Kate's work, follow her and follow her work, what she's doing at MIT and support it. So Kate, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for being such an amazing bridge between communities. I mean, it's such important work. And it's the perspectives that you bring to both sides are just, I mean, thank you for that. And thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure for sure.